Good evening, everyone. I'm Jennifer McNally, and I'm the president of the Board of Trustees of the Bexley Public Library. I'm delighted to welcome you all here tonight, both in the room and on Zoom, for this very special program with two of Bexley's most renowned and short-term residents. Tonight, former Ohio First Ladies Hope Taft and Frances Strickland will discuss their friendship and the important roles that courage and kindness play in the development of our children and our future leaders. As First Lady of Ohio from 1999 to 2007, Hope Taft focused on promoting positive youth development, alcohol and drug prevention, and community volunteerism. She developed the Ohio Heritage Garden at the governor's residence on North Parkview and still works to maintain it. It is the state's official botanical garden of native plants. She also spearheaded the creation of the largest outdoor geologic state map and walk through time at the Natural Resources Park at the state fairgrounds. Both are well worth a visit. Since moving to Greene County in 2007, she has maintained her focus on community involvement by co-founding the Little Miami River Cleaners and the Little Miami Watershed Network. Hope Rothert graduated from Southern Methodist University in 1966 and married Bob Taft in 1967. They live in the Dayton area. The Taft's daughter, Anna, followed in the family tradition of public service by starting the Tandana Foundation in 2006 and recruiting her mother to be president of the board. The Tandana Foundation weaves friendships, instills respect and responsibility, and empowers communities in Ecuador and Mali, West Africa, through scholarships and volunteer vacations focused on healthcare, the environment, food and economic security, and community infrastructure. It has been a joy for Hope and Bob to see how this organization has grown and how many people's lives have changed through its efforts. Frances Smith Strickland is an educational psychologist who believes that the clues to meaningful life work are found in a person's early traits. Frances was born and reared on a farm in Simpsonville, Kentucky. She received a BS in education from Murray State University, a master's degree in guidance and counseling from the University of Colorado, and a doctorate in educational psychology from the University of Kentucky. Frances married a fellow psychologist, Ted Strickland, and moved to Ohio. When Ted entered politics, she left her field of education and served as his campaign manager. When Ted was elected to Congress, she became his first chief of staff. After 12 years in Congress, Ted was elected governor of Ohio, and she became first lady. In this role, Frances focused her energy on children and families and attempted to broaden the scope of education by initiating the Governor's Institute on Creativity and Innovation in Public Education. The first edition of her book, The Little Girl Who Grew Up to Be Governor, was published in 1991. Frances wanted to document for the children of Kentucky, especially the girls, that electing a woman governor in 1983 in a small southern state was almost unheard of. 30 years later, she revised the book to include more about the political process and the importance of the role in government. Now retired, Frances is focused on joining with others who are concerned that the mood of the country has shifted in the direction of individualism and self-reliance at the expense of the collective good and community well-being. She hopes that her book reminds readers that while times and circumstances always change, the human need for trusting relationships is always with us. And our moderator tonight is my friend Suzanne Goldsmith, a senior editor at Columbus Monthly Magazine. Suzanne writes and edits articles on a wide range of topics, including politics, culture, philanthropy, and the arts. If you pick up the December issue, you can read her profile of our Congresswoman, Joyce Beatty. She's the mother of two young adults who attended Bexley schools and spent many happy hours here at the Bexley Public Library. Her husband, Dennis Hirsch, as a professor of law at both Capital University and Ohio State. Suzanne graduated from Harvard University and is the author of 2 books, A City Year, which is an account of a year in a youth community service program in Boston, and Wash Ashore, an environmental novel for teens that was the 2014 winner of the National Green Earth Book Award and a finalist for an Ohioana Book Award. Please join me in welcoming Hope, Frances, and Suzanne.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I just want to say it's an honor to have this assignment to moderate a conversation between these 2 wonderful women. And I'm excited for tonight. I also want to acknowledge how extraordinary it is to have a lifelong Republican and a lifelong Democrat together here on the stage in service of a common goal. And while we're going to talk tonight about this small but mighty book, I want to start the conversation tonight by asking the 2 of you about your first meeting. Tell me how you met at the moment when your husband Bob Taft was leaving office and your husband Ted Strickland was moving into the big house on Parkview, and I'd like to hear about your first time together.
Well, there's a tradition of having transition meetings between the first ladies coming in and going out. And so I invited Frances over for lunch so she could see the residence and know where she was going to be living for the next 4 to 8 years, and to make friends with her. And so she came for lunch and we had a good time sitting in the little table in the dining room and introducing Frances to the staff and to the ways of the big house is what I used to call it. And I know as lunch was being finished, we both said that we would love some hot water with lemon. And that was not very usual response. So I knew immediately I was going to like Frances.
Yeah.
Soulmates.
Yes.
And I didn't have a clue what was inside, what was behind that big wooden door. And, when I knocked on it, and I don't know if you had any pre-existing ideas about me. They'd been in office for 8 years, but Hope had been so much in schools with kids and probably with the alcohol work and so forth that I never really saw her out on the trail very much. But, just such a warm person that when she opened the door and then I'm thinking that you took me in and showed me the tree and that was decorated. And one of the first things that I noticed was how each state or each county in the state, there was an ornament on the tree. And she had systematically gone about to make sure that every county was represented on that tree. So that gave me the first clue that this woman was about Ohio and a love of the people. And it was just a piece of cake from there, but a good sense of humor. And then we sat down and but if you know Hope very well at all, you know that she starts right in on her list of things that she wanted about, and the garden was at the top of the list and keeping that going. And it was a pretty easy decision to be supportive of the garden, even though I was not a great gardener myself, because she had a story behind that garden. I mean, she wanted to tell the story of Ohio. And again, as was true with the Christmas tree, the garden reflected all of the geographical differences in Ohio. So there was a sand dune from up around the Lake Erie and in that area. I'm probably gonna get these parts wrong.
So far you're doing really
There's an
well.
Appalachian area and all of that. So when people would come in, she would be able to tell about the whole of Ohio by showing the different areas of the garden. So this commitment to Ohio was something really easy to want to promote and keep going. So,
And you've kept your friendship going over the years.
Frances really helped complete the Heritage Garden because one of the last things we did was to work with the county commissioners so we would have a stone that represented each county. and we got to Scioto County and they didn't want to give us one because we were the wrong party.
Yeah.
So fortunately, Frances came in and she was of the other party. And because that's very a special
Well, and I
place
said, how
for.
embarrassing it is
For
that your
Taft.
own county doesn't have a rock there or a stone.
So we quickly got a rock. In fact, we got a big rock that's now a bench.
Did a bench. Yeah, they really made up for it big time. But one of the first things I really appreciated was Hope's sense of humor. And she kind of wanted to introduce me around. And I remember pretty early on, she wanted me to go over to the Floral Garden area.
Franklin Park Conservatory.
Yeah. And the earlier things, she was still the first lady, so I deferred and walked behind her. And, she had the look of, the royalty. And then when we went over to the conservatory, I was first lady. And so she had to get behind me. And so we were going around, coming up through, and toward the end, we were coming up this wooden ramp. They were doing some remodeling, I think. And there was a woman standing at the top, and there was a railing. She had her arms leaning over on this railing, and she was just looking at me, and then she looked back at Hope, and then she looked at me. And when I got up even with her, I was leading the way, I said, you look like you might have a question you want to ask. And she said, I'm just trying to figure out, I know she's somebody, I'm just trying to figure out if you're somebody. So we get back to the kitchen and Anna is there that day. And so I told Hope, and again, I didn't know her all that well, but I said, well, I got a comeuppance today. And I told her the story, and Anna came in, her eyes were just dancing with delight. She got the biggest laugh out of that. And it was just kind of a moment that you knew you were going to be really good friends from that. So
That's a great story.
We did several things during the transition period together, and some people would come up afterwards to one or other us and say, "It was so nice to see you, Frances Taft or Hope Strickland."
I called Hope Strickland a couple times.
It was funny. It was fun.
But one day I was down in Ross County talking to a group of the women that wear purple and the red hats and the purple dresses, and this woman yelled out from the back of the room, "Tell the story that you told on TV this morning." And I couldn't believe it, but was that little guy that was with the gardening program? He had interviewed us, and just the day before, I think Hope had. I was in the kitchen, and somebody came in and said, "Hope's outside. She's got a present for you." And I said, "Hope's got a present for me? Well, the Tafts are really rich. It must be a pony since it's outside." So then we'd go out there and no pony here. And then they say, "No, it's on over here." And we keep going. And we end up over on the side garden. And I said, "Well, where's my present?" And she picks up a turtle,
A dead
little box turtle. And it's just oozing stuff out of it. And it's rank. Yeah. And I said, "I thought you liked me, Hope. What is this?" And the gift was the pawpaw trees do best when they have
They're pollinated by carrion flies.
pollinated by carrion
Oh,
flies.
so it was a
And,
gift.
this was attracting the flies. So this is how deep into this stuff she is. She would think I would be thrilled with that gift that she gave me. But so I was telling that to the little guy, and it somehow or another it made it on his show, and so they made me tell that again. That may be the story for us.
Well, over underneath your coat, there's a little Christmas present for you, which is some pawpaw
Oh my
jelly
goodness.
or jam. I mean,
Nice. Thank you for those great stories. Let's talk a little bit about the book,
Okay.
The Little Girl Who Grew Up to Be Governor. It's as I said, a small but mighty book. The subtitle is Leadership Lessons and Stories from the Life of Martha Lane Collins. And it's about the first woman governor of Kentucky. And you don't spend a lot of time talking about her career as governor. It's really about her childhood, and it's organized around leadership lessons from vignettes from her childhood, how she learned that you have to do research after she tried to dig a a pool for the town and dug a mud pit instead, or how she learned that she needed to seek help when trying to teach a calf how to suckle. Tell me what was going on in your life when you decided to write, and this is the second edition. It was written in 1991. What were you doing at that time, and what made you want to write this book and write it in this way?
Well, all of my professional career has been working with children that have had differences of some type. In summers, I worked at a program for Easter seals, which was children who had physical handicaps of some type. I worked with kids in residential facility that had emotional problems. And in schools, I was evaluating children who were having learning difficulties. And I guess maybe we get wired up this way, but all these children were referred because they had problems adapting or adjusting some way. And for me, I always wanted to try to find out what their strengths were and build on the strengths, and then those would then help deal with the parts that were holding them back. And when you do that, you kind of start really looking at children, because the differences bring them to you, and the differences have gotten them in trouble, but then you want their differences to take them forward. And so what I began to see is different children are referred, and some of them have true learning problems, but some of the others are having problems adapting to what's going on in the environment. And so one of the tests that I would give to try to figure out what was going on in their lives was this thing called learning styles test. And so if you got a problem, the child's got a problem, then this test suggested that the 4 ways a person generally uses to cope with it. And one of the first ways is hostility. So, you're angry, don't make me do this, I'm not going to do this. A second way is passivity, like this isn't important, who wants to do this? It's no good anyway. And then the third is anxiety, fear that you can't do it, and seeking extra attention and help and all that. But the fourth way is, I called it Plan B. And these are children, if they run in, that know that if they've got a problem and they can't solve it this way, then they've got a Plan B to try another way. And one of the reasons that stuck with me was by having that Plan B child in there, the questionnaire, then trying to determine which of the 4 coping styles a child would use, had to put some positive stuff in, because Plan B is positive stuff. And so many of the other tests were all things wrong with the child. And that really bothered me a lot. So when I moved up here and I was thinking about Martha Lane and what she had done in Kentucky, I decided, at first I was supposed to write the book for adults. It was supposed to be an adult version. But then I decided I wanted to give her to children. And I thought, if they could just see, if you think about the kind of life she had on the farm, and her friends were animals and stuff like that, she was not she didn't have an extraordinary childhood from that standpoint. She was just an ordinary child, and kind of background like I had too. We both were in the farming area. But the way she coped, what she did, made all the difference in the world. And then the parenting that backed her made all the difference in the world. And so I felt like if I could, and then there was the idea of about 7 intelligences, and that this was an interpersonal intelligence where she was outstanding. But if I could use her life as a model for children to see how you get to Plan B, and all leaders have Plan Bs. I mean, they may run into a snag of some kind, but they don't stop. And here's a big example of it. I mean, Hope is full of plan Bs. She gets her projects going and she runs into walls everywhere, but she manages to keep going. And this is what it is. And I hope we talk about Anna some. She's got a daughter that's the same way. And so I was hoping that then I could put her out there as a model, not only.
She's a Plan B
She's a
child.
plan, and
Martha Lane.
leaders are plan B, yeah.
And you interviewed her mother to learn these stories from her childhood. Did you learn things about the way her mother parented her that led her to become more of a Plan B child and encourage leadership, things that you wanted to infuse into this book?
Well, it might have helped that she was an only child. I'm not really sure. I mean, for those who have more than one child, but I'm hoping that those who have more than one child see differences in those children. And certainly in my growing up, I was one of 4 children, and all of us were different from each other. But what happened was Martha Lane was a person who always looked forward. She never hardly ever looked back. So I had this working idea in my mind because of the kids I had seen at school that if she was doing outstanding things like being a leader, she was probably getting into trouble, pushing the boundaries and the edges. But she couldn't remember being in trouble very much. And I said, I just got to know about this. So she said, I don't know, just ask my mother. She probably can tell you what I was like. So that's how I got to her mother. But because I was thinking about an adult book at that time for Martha Lane, I read John Gardner's book on leadership to make sure that I knew what I was looking for in terms of leadership abilities within her. And after I had this interview with her mother, and she was telling me all these stories, little funny stories, I was thinking, it's too bad that people in Kentucky can't hear these cute little stories. But as I was driving home, I thought about Gardner's book, and then I thought about those stories, and I thought, these stories are representing some of these traits. Yeah. So when I got home, I lined out Gardner's traits, then I lined out those stories, and I started matching them up. And so then I went back and talked to Martha Lane about giving this book to children instead of to adults.
That's great.
That's what it came about.
Yeah. Hope you raised a leader. Your daughter started an international organization that fosters leadership and communication and sort of connection between Americans and people in Mali and Ecuador. And it's 15 years now. Did you see resonances in this book between your daughter's story, raising her, and the kinds of things that Frances brings out about Martha Lane Collins in the book?
Yeah, I think so. Anna and I were driving in the car together, and we were talking about this book because I was telling her this was coming up and I needed some stories. And she reminded me that when she was young, she used to love to make up games that would involve other people, whether it was some sort of a word game or a number game or whatever. And I would have to play them as well as other people she could gather up because like Martha Lane, she was the only child. And she also said that she loved other cultures. And that was very evident from the time she was in the 2nd grade because she pulled out a flyer from the country school, which is in Holmes County, in her 1st grade, between 1st and 2nd grade, and said she wanted to do this in the summer of her 2nd grade. And I had thrown it away because I didn't think she'd be interested. Well, she was, and she did that as long as she could. And those are really 2 traits that she uses now.
Talk about the committees.
Yeah, I will tell her that in a minute.
Okay.
But she plans international ventures for people in other countries so that you can get to know their culture. And because she had gone to the country school in 2nd grade through 9th grade, she was very familiar with what other cultures were like from the Amish perspective. and taking a gap year in Ecuador really exposed her to that one. And then she said that the planning of the games was what she enjoyed the most. So she likes the planning of this way to help other people interact with other cultures. So it was fun.
And curiosity is a huge trait leaders have to have a lot of curiosity about other countries and being open to learn stuff.
Yeah. And Frances was referring to the story. She came home from kindergarten one day and said, "Mom, I don't know. Nobody wants to play house with me. I mean, no one wants to play committee with me. Everyone wants to play house." And obviously she had been under the table too many times in her early life while I was going to committee meetings.
You clearly had been nurturing her leadership skills.
And I think she brings up then, you were talking about having trouble getting her out of the sandbox.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
When
yeah.
she was little, which would let her know she was going to be in the outdoors. And so you were asking about Ms. Hall, same as with Hope here. If you're really tuned into your child and you see what they're driven by, committed to, and this is the thing about leaders, they get driven to do things. And it's just kind of easy then to fold in. You kind of take your direction from them, but as was really key in this book, keeping her safe while she was curious and while she was going out exploring, or she was constantly wanting to be out with other people accomplishing.
She was a
things.
very wandering, curious child.
Right, but
Yeah.
she knew her own limits pretty well.
Yeah.
You know, I learned that she wouldn't do anything that she didn't think she could do.
Mhm.
And so that it was pretty safe to encourage her to fulfill her dreams as best she could. And it's wonderful to see her interacting with people in Ecuador and communities in Ecuador in much the same way as the parenting skills that Frances has talked about in this book. You know,
That's interesting.
yeah, really nurturing the positive and getting them to be partners and letting them take the lead and then helping them accomplish their goals.
Yeah. There's an afterword in the book that is by Martha Lane Collins, and she says, "These are my mother's keeper stories." We all have keeper stories that we use to kind of define our personal narrative. And reading between the lines in your book, it seems like you're suggesting that not only is it the parents' job to discern those traits that might blossom into leadership or other good qualities of character in the adult, but maybe to tell the stories that would nurture that or that would encourage that. I mean, the story is just a piece of entertainment until you imbue it with some meaning. And I wonder if that's what you meant, and if you have advice for parents about how to move to keeper stories, or you hope from your experiences with Anna, did you tell her that she was a leader or that she was going to head a lot of committees? Or
well, I think there are stories that you just keep repeating to your child because they're cute or they're funny or
yeah,
and then in a certain point in your life, you realize, well, that's really her and that's really what she's doing in life. And I should have known it all along, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And they begin to form a pattern
Yeah,
over
yeah,
time.
yeah.
But one of the things I was wanting to do was, I know parents are busy, and then I was stressing grandparents in there. Grandparents seem to have unlimited time. They've got the children, they really focus on them and give them, I think that's why there's a special bond between children and grandparents, is they've got the time to put into them. Whereas a lot of parents are busy carrying out their jobs, and they just sacrifice a lot to keep food on the table and everything. But the stories let kids know that you've noticed them and that you picked
Yeah.
up something that was fun and that you appreciate. And I have a keeper story about Suzanne's daughter, Claire, from the first time I met her. Claire, when Ted was running for office, Suzanne was good enough to have an introductory thing. I think it was for me that
for you,
night
yeah.
at her house. And how old was Claire then?
What year was it then?
Well, it had been in 2005, 6, 2006.
So yeah, so Clara was 7.
Yeah. So the
8.
little redhead thing sitting at the table, she was the hostess. We were coming in, she was dealing with the name tags. So I was totally charmed by her. But not only was she doing the name tags, but she was personalizing with some little art thing on there. Personalized, I mean, I had one thing, the next person had a different thing. And I thought right then, this is a creative child. And I mean, she was just exuding it. So what's she doing today?
She's a visual arts. She was a visual arts major in college, and she's doing photography. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the one keeper story that I had about a 7-year-old, and here she is. So, so I think children need to hear these keeper stories because they have a lot of affection. I mean, this is a way of telling them, I noticed you, I like this about you.
Yeah.
This is fun. I always want to remember this about you. So it's a part. But, and another thing that I was trying to stress, and having Martha Lane asking her to re-stress it too, is that in the part trying to get kids to see and learn about part B and being able to figure out another way to do things is to ask for help from an adult that cares about them. And I think about it now in this culture, and this is one of the reasons I expanded the book. When we just think about what we've heard this week happening with kids in schools and things. And if have said that when I grew up, I was at a time where parents are really strict, and I was, to tell you the truth, I was afraid of my parents, and was reluctant to tell them some things. I didn't know if it was my fault or somebody else's fault, or it was going to get me in trouble, whatever. But parents today can't afford to have their kids afraid of them. They've got to be their best friends. I mean, if they're being bullied at school or something's going on, that they cannot go inside. They've got to be able to talk to their parents. So this was a part of really stressing that somebody cares and will help you if you ask for them. And again, if the book can just model for children that they can always find another way, then that would be a big part of what I want to do with the book.
You published the first edition in 1991, and then you came back and rewrote it 30 years later. I don't know how much rewriting you did. I'm wondering how much of it still felt relevant. And I mean, you wrote it before you and Ted went to Congress, and then to the governor's office. And then we've all sort of been through the political mill in this country over the last decade or so. What needed to change in the book?
Well, so I think Hope and I were similar political spouses. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you can, but I'm kind of a peacemaker type. And, but people campaigning, running for office kind of have to be warriors now. And here we are, we're supposed to go out and, speak for them and all that kind of thing. And I was given these negative talking points that I was supposed to use, and I hated them. I never really liked to use them. So if some of you have ever been to anything, you've probably seen that I pulled out the guitar and I've tried to do I did a Davy Crockett tune, putting Ted's biography on that, and anything to come across as to stay away from the negative stuff. And I think we did what we needed to do without getting into the acrimony and stuff like that. So with the way both of us were, there was hardly any question that we were going to get along because
we both focused on the positive.
Yeah. And we don't want to carry that stuff. And so when I was thinking about the book and how much toxic stuff is out there now, I like to think about, well, how would you explain to a child the thoughts about politics?
Yeah.
Because we were in it, and I like to think it was a noble thing when we were in it, right? I mean, we were trying to do right and serve and all that kind of stuff. but so much of it is just doubted now. And one of the things, I learned is that children see this going on, they have to cope with it some way. We don't know what they're taking in, what they're doing with it. And just like with the Michigan situation, this young man was taking stuff in and he was coping in a hostile way. And so he went and acted out in a hostile way. Somebody else could be bullied or whatever and take it in and be passive and maybe end up just taking it inward out on themselves. And that's where you get them taking their own lives. So it's really important to think about the fact that this stuff is going on and kids are having to cope with it some way. And writing a book to try to teach children give them good models and that they can go to an adult for help and that there is always another way to do things, like Part B kids. We are teaching them how to navigate what's going on. And with each of those little stories, there are things in there that I hope trigger meaty conversations with the parent. It's really hard to bring up conversations with kids in a non-stilted way. But I got a big kick out of a friend of mine who, when she married, kept her birth name. And when she got to that chapter about Martha Lane having to change her name from Hall to Collins, the little girl could not understand why she had to change her name because this is not what she had experienced. So then they got into this long discussion about people and their last names and things. And but the part about discipline where, I don't know, how many of you read the book or had to take a look at it? So Martha Lane gets out of the yard and she crosses the road and the parents are always worried they're gonna get run over and she's, so then the inspector
Stuck in
comes
the
up.
corn crib.
Inspector comes up with that she's going to get a spanking because she got out across the road, which is that was big then. But Mrs. Hall said in there that she didn't much think about either spanking or yelling at children. And so what she liked to do was she had this little chair that she put Martha Lane in, they have little conversations. Well, one of the reasons that we have all the scapegoating and everything going on is this harsh treatment of children in those little young ages. That book can then trigger a conversation where if, this is my wildest dream here, if a child feels like they're being treated too harshly, they could just say, could we just get a little chair and you talk to me? And just ways for parents to say, or when you do something that upsets me, how would you like me to let you know that I'm upset with you? So, we can deal with how they're coping with it and make sure that it's positive and healthy. And I think that's the only way we're going to stop having some of this turning against each other that we're having right now.
Well, that might be a good place to stop and seek out some questions from the audience. Do some people have some questions for Frances or Hope today?
I will just add.
Raise your hand.
About the whole thing about the differences in the party. I really wanted to do that and to try to do it in a way that showed that each party is equally important. And it became a much easier thing to do by thinking about how you would explain it to a child than to an adult.
You do a great job in this book of breaking down the political process and explaining it in terms that a child can understand. And in a certain way, you're kind of performing a reset because you're giving them a chance to think about politics away from CNN or Fox News or whatever they're hearing in the house and just kind of learn the basics. I loved your definition of the parties. I understand you vetted it with Hope beforehand. You described the Democrats as the people who have a lot of ideas and you describe them as having a job to do, and their job is to push things forward, and the Republicans' job is to ask questions and find out what's it going to
It's
cost and
needed.
what's the risk.
Yeah.
Was that fair?
I think overall,
Yeah.
I think, both parties have good ideas and both parties have questions to ask, and that part of the process is making sure that everybody is comfortable with what comes out. And so
Yeah.
there's a lot of give and take and compromise and talk back and forth, and hopefully it's decent.
Civility.
And civility sits in, and there's a lot of respect and personal responsibility for what is said, so that you come out with the best of both worlds for the time. Oftentimes, one party or the other will want to take giant steps when only a little step is what can be accomplished, and that's part of the process.
Yeah.
So in her thing about nature and my thing about people, I see that there has to be balance.
Mhm.
And that's when you get out of balance, and we're really out of balance right now, then that's when when you get into abusive situations and unfairness. I take some time to talk about the fairness with the courts and things. And you have to have the differences. When you study creativity, there has to be the tension, there has to be the opposition, but it has to be balanced. It has to be respected. And it is about winning and losing now, rather than finding the balance that is good for growth and moving forward. And so when you go too far in one direction, it's just like the stock market, there's a correction. And this is when we change parties. We think we've gone too far one way, so we change parties and we make a correction. And then we go the other way and we make a correction. But that needs to be within, so here, it doesn't need to be run by a battle between the extremes, because then you lose the reasonableness that you have to have. So that was what I was really hoping would come through the book. And if we as Democrats and Republicans, so you can't just leave it to chance that everybody has good ideas and everybody cares about money. I think we're wired up for the balance that is necessary for survival, that some people look after this part of it and some people generally look after this part. So, and then I try to run through, like when we're talking about the budget now with bills we're going to pass, the Build Back Better thing. When Republicans speak, what's the first thing that they are concerned about? And it's,
Money.
can we afford this? That's their job. That's what I'm trying to say. That's what they're supposed to be asking about. That's their half of the equation. The Democrats are saying, but mothers need a break. I mean, we need to get women back in the force. We've got to have childcare, and we've got to have money for our schools and so forth. And that's the Democrats' job, is just make sure we keep doing things to prove and move forward. But it just like couples in a home where they're trying to make sure that they have the money for the things they buy. You have to have that kind of thing going on. But it is, I think all of us would probably agree, it's really out of balance now, and we're not in that realm of where it feels creative and good, but it feels more destructive.
But it'd be nice if children could get that lesson and come out of your book thinking, yeah, we all need each other.
Yeah, and I hope they can ask good questions. If they get a chance.
They always do. Yeah.
Ask the right questions of politicians instead of getting
Yeah.
on to who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, wanting to know what they're wanting to do, and then see whether they're Republican or Democrat in spirit.
Yeah.
I never ask.
You never ask questions.
I never ask whether you're a Republican or a Democrat.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're just you, and
Yeah.
you've got to have some strengths that are useful for some part of society and the current project that I happen to be working on.
Well, and I think,
Yeah.
yeah, you better watch it, what you tell, hope you're interested in. But I think
Now's your chance.
when you're
Recruit.
when your spouse, I mean, I always kind of felt like I was there for everybody.
Mhm,
And so I never really paid any attention either.
mhm.
Well, maybe you ladies need to take this show on the road and
Well,
inspire people
The thing is,
everywhere.
you kind of always campaign partisan, but you serve nonpartisan when you.
Once you're
it's a
elected,
bit-
you represent all the people.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we definitely need to remember is that once you're elected, you serve all the people in your area, in your district, in your state, whatever you represent. And that's a wide range of philosophies.
Yeah.
Do we have some questions? Yes. I think,
With the coronavirus, everything that's happening, kids are seeing, negative, what are your thoughts about that? Potential impact on living?
Well, this is, again, where I think what I'm hoping is that enough parents will say, we can't just leave it to chance what our children are thinking about it. We need to have the conversations with them. And in the book, there are 2 or 3 places where good governors see that when people, if there's a virus or a illness or something, that something's done about it. And so it's hard for me to think about just zeroing in on one thing in the context of what I'm trying to do with the book. It's like relationship building between the parent and the child. And you build that relationship, trusting, because you bring up these little topics, you have these substantive conversations, and then it becomes easier to bring them up. But I think we just make assumptions that kids, as long as they seem to be happy and everything, we don't realize what they're going. And so with the times the way they are, I think we need to become much more intentional about having these kind of conversations with the kids, but they need to be developmentally appropriate. We don't need to scare the wits out of them.
mhm.
And that's, again, why we're trying to do the Plan B. And there's a lot out there that's scary, and we don't want, little kids that are really scared don't have as good a chance of being curious and, getting the best out of their lives later on. So it's something that they were talking about, social emotional learning and civics and stuff. It's not something that they just can't, it has to be taught and systematically done. And so I was really hoping this book could be a little tool that parents could use. And then we finish this one, if you're interested in the racial relations, Martin Luther King's Jr.'s little book, just keep bringing more books in where you can have these conversations and be teaching the way to look at things.
There's a microphone.
Right there, if anybody wants to walk up and ask your question. Yeah.
Oh, there are people working on that. And then because of my early work, I think about the children, and I am convinced our way out of this is in the next generations that are coming on. And so if we would recognize, like right now, I've really been watching the polls of young people that are between 18 and 29, I think. And they are basically wanting the masks, wanting the responsibleness. At least 51%, even that aren't college educated, want it. So the hope is in the young people coming up. And that's why I really want us to start paying more attention to having these, developing relationships with them and having these conversations. And if you get close to them at all, they'll tell you what's on their mind. Even the boy in Michigan was sending signals to the teachers with these drawings and stuff in the class.
Yeah, for sure.
We just, and they tried to do something with it, but we just need to be close enough to them to get them to Plan B, a better thing that serves them well. But I think that we want quick answers. And when it comes to human development, we have to invest the time and the concern. And it takes the grandparents and the parents and everybody that cares to come in.
And the mental health workers.
So, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for working in the mental health field, because with social media and in the public environment, it's really hard to raise children now. And they need someone that they can trust, that they can express themselves to. And often that's not a parent or a grandparent in their life. And that's why you are really important in what you do. And to me, if we can start small and get more children to have those caring and responsible people in their lives, the more resilient they're going to be, and the more they're going to decide that anger and passivity are not the way to go, that we all need plan Bs, and we need to work together to make sure there's a plan B for everyone.
but do you all know about the Beat the Odds program that the Children's Defense Fund has? They give scholarships to college for young people who have like been homeless, lived in automobiles and stuff. And I always like their stories and what turned them around. And almost invariably, it's one person
Yeah.
who noticed a strength in them
Mhm.
and complimented them on it and said, you ought to do this, or why don't you come to that?
Mhm.
And I will help you. And, or they make, they make good grades or something in school when everything else is falling apart all around them. They find that they can, and they take that and they ride all the way through all this bad stuff. And it's just one person, maybe in the third grade, maybe in the fifth grade, maybe a junior in high school.
Mhm.
And it's amazing. And I'll tell you, one of the most powerful things that happened to me when I was working with kids is a young girl, she was, I think in the sixth grade, was referred for emotional problems. She was not playing with anybody. She kept to herself. And so I went through my battery of stuff. And she said to one of the questions, that people didn't like her in answer to the question. And so I came back to it and I said, so you don't think the kids like you? And she said, I know they don't. And I said, well, why? And she said, because I stink. And I had never had an answer like that, so I was blown away. And I said, you think that's what the problem is? And she said, I know it is. And I said, well, is there any way I can help you with that? Have you got any idea about some way I can help you? She had it all planned out. If she could come to school and be allowed to go to the gym and then take a shower, and we could give her some soap, and she could just take a shower after she got to school, she'd be all right. And I said, well, we'll just talk to your principal about that. Principal, and she said she won't, because this principal was really strict. She was afraid to go to her and stuff. And of course, the principal was just melted. I mean, who wouldn't be? So not only that, they gave her clean clothes every day, and she would switch back before she went home. And I don't know what her mother ever knew that was going on. But this kid had a solution. She was a Plan B kid, but she had to be referred for emotional problems for me to get that out of her. We should be able to pick this stuff up without having to say a child is emotionally disturbed in order to get to that. So I think this whole thing about paying more attention is part of it.
The resiliency literature is filled with stories like that, where it's the kids can be involved in 100,000 things, but it's only when they have a caring adult that leads that program that they really become resilient. They can feed on that positivity that person instills in them and make a difference in their lives. So you're doing great things.
Thank you guys for being here.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. Should we finish up now? I think do we have more questions? From the Zoom, okay.
Of
great.
course, you're in the library. People want to know what your favorite books are.
Oh,
Go first.
well, about 98% nonfiction, so that's the first thing. But I like books that kind of make me think about the big picture of like one of my favorite authors is Joseph Campbell, The Power of the Myth,
Yeah.
because he keeps a perspective out there of we're all part of nature, and it has about the balance, about the opposition, about once you decide and you're committed, like hope, and then there are hidden hands that help you, and so it's this whole bigger thing. I like to read books like that.
I read mostly books that are involved with things that I'm involved with. So it could be nature oriented, could be native plants. This summer, I walked 160 miles from Fort Ancient to Newark by way of Chillicothe to raise awareness of the World Heritage Site nomination for the the Hopewell cultural sites. So I've been reading a lot about American Indians, and particularly about their exodus from Ohio in the 1830s, and what a devastating thing that was for that whole culture. And now it's how we help them become more resilient because of that earlier activity. And so I do those kind of things.
Do we
Yeah.
have one last question? Any last questions? All right, well, let's give our speakers and Suzanne a round of applause. So before we head out into the cold, I just want to mention three things. First, Gramercy Books has Frances's book available in the back of the room. She is available to sign. I'm pretty sure she'll make herself available to sign for a few
Got a
minutes
pen.
if you pick up a book. The second is that this talk will be on the library's YouTube channel in a couple of days. So share it with friends, share it with anyone you would like. And finally, please pick up the library's winter brochure, our events guide. We have so many cool programs that we do here at Bexley Public Library. I'm just going to mention one. This Sunday, we have a program called Tea at 3, and we'll have the Alex Burgoyne Quartet live jazz here at Bexley Public Library. Thank you to all of you for coming tonight.